You're listening to Ecto Portal, a journey into the unknown with Anthony Anderson and Verna Wilson.
I hope that you are seated comfortably with the light turned down and the curtains drawn.
Hello, welcome once again to another journey into the unexplored, the unexplained, the unknown. Ecto Portal. I'm Anthony Anderson, your host, and I'm here with my co-host,
Verna Wilson.
And today's show, we're gonna guess what? It's about a ghost. What a surprise!
It's about a ghost, and it's about Hollywood. Hollywood and ghosts seem to go together.
There's a lot of ghost stories in Hollywood.
There really are
stories surrounding famous people and ghosts, whether they live in a house that's haunted or whether they've died in haunt a house,
or a studio, or something to do with
hotel, building,
even a sidewalk. Sometimes I've heard of certain ghosts haunting certain sidewalks, where some buildings were. Yeah,
the haunted sidewalk.
Haunted sidewalks.
It sounds menacing.
Yeah, and we were there not too long ago, so
that's right.
We actually kind of felt that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, whose ghost are we covering today?
JEAN HARLOW.
JEAN HARLOW.
One of my favorites. I love her.
All right, so let's kick it off.
Yeah. Well, the JEAN HARLOW ghost, she is reported to be residing and seen in a white stucco one-family house set back from a quiet residential street in Westwood, a section of Los Angeles. It's near the university, and it's a section of Los Angeles that's considered quiet and upper class. It's a very quiet upper-class neighborhood. It's a two-story building, and it has a beautiful, elegant old staircase. It winds from the bottom of the ground floor to the upper story, and the downstairs portion, it contains a large oblong living room, which leads into the dining room, and there's a kitchen and a bathroom that's connected to that area, and a stairway leading to the upper floor, and upstairs are two bedrooms and a bathroom. So JEAN HARLOW, she was a popular actress in the 1930s. She was considered a sex symbol, and she was considered very provocative, and she dressed in a very elegant but casual style of the period. She wore a lot of slinky dresses, sweaters, and colorful accessories, and it made her one of the well-known glamour girls of the American screen. And she kept her life pretty private. The public was never really informed of any of her personal tragedies, of her life, really. Then the press, they carefully presented only those aspects of her personality that, they felt the public should know.
It's kind of like when the old studio system that were the actual studios like Paramount, Warner Brothers, and Fox would actually pay the press to clean up a star's reputation if they took a night on the town and perhaps hung out with an unsavory character, a loan shark, a gambler, a womanizer, so that the public would always see this squeaky clean image. And it seems to me like JEAN HARLOW didn't really have to do that as much as other stars.
She didn't have to do that as much, but they did exactly what you're describing. They only printed those aspects and presented those aspects which they thought the audience would want to see, about that she was living this glamorous movie star life. So, but anyway, there's been a medium that that's visited the house, and the medium visited the house with a promise to the present house owner that the family's name wouldn't be divulged. I guess the house owner wanted
they're going to
keep,
investigate it. And
right, they
do
investigated
mediums.
it. Right, they wanted to keep it private, their name private, and I can understand that because otherwise everybody, you know how people are, they'll be driving by and going, "Ooh, spooky house," you know.
Yeah.
So, and the wife of that particular family, she stated that the first time she ever had any inkling of any spirit in the house was the day that they moved in. Their two dogs reacted by running and barking and growling into one of the upper bedrooms, and it was at that time she reported that she heard a soft whisper which said, "Please help me." And other times she heard her name being called by female voices.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and the female voices could have very well have been the staff that worked for her, not necessarily Jean herself, but...
Well, I mean, and that's also assuming. Remember when I always said this before? This is assuming if you have the belief that someone dies in a place, they are forever bound to it.
Right.
I don't believe that's true in any way. I think they're able to move and come and go anywhere they want to go.
I agree with you.
So that doesn't necessarily mean that those voices of "Please help me" was Jean Harlow, but
right.
If Jean Harlow lived in this building, I could see where the assumption could be made.
Could be made, exactly. Everybody automatically would think it's her. And also, the building probably had a history before Jean Harlow, too. So
I'm sure.
Yeah, so of course. It's an old Hollywood building. So, but she reported on seeing what imagined to be ectoplasm, which is what, of course, our show's named after.
Yep.
And it's like, she described it like cigarette smoke, which did frighten the dogs. And that's exactly what ectoplasm looks like.
But
some of it looks like.
The description's interesting because you got to wonder: are they describing a mist or real ectoplasm?
Real ectoplasm.
Ectoplasm.
It does manifest in different ways, not just
exactly,
smoke. Yeah, I get you.
I'm just curious if there. Obviously, there's no more description than that, but I would be curious. Like, did it have a color? Was it white? Was it green? Was it murky, gray? You know what I mean?
Well, she said it looked like cigarette smoke, and I've seen people describe spirit energy looking like cigarette smoke.
I mean, I guess a phantom mist could be considered a form of ectoplasm too.
Yeah, that's true too. So she said other times when her and her husband were in bed, there were 3 loud thumps, enough that it alarmed her and her husband, woke them up, and convinced him that the house was haunted, and on occasion a light switch would turn itself on. So I don't know if that has to do with the electrical, or that has to do with the fact that they turned all the lights off and it would turn itself on. That would actually convince me a little bit that something's going on. Back to Jean Harlow, her and her parents did live in the house for 4 years, but her parents actually lived there a little bit longer than that. Jean Harlow actually died in a very tragic way, as a lot of as it's well known with a lot of Hollywood stars that ghost people talk about. It's understood that she died as a result of a beating given to her by her husband, which damaged her kidneys on the second night after their honeymoon.
Yeeks.
Yeah, she came back to the house, and she took her mother into the bathroom and showed her what he did to her, and she was covered with bruises. And actually a beating, a really awful beating, from a stronger to a weaker person can damage your kidneys. Unfortunately, I knew of somebody who was beaten by her boyfriend, and she ended up in the hospital with internal injuries, and I think her kidneys were also damaged, and I really can do that. Yeah.
And I'm sure then they still knew a lot, but they probably knew less than they do now.
Right, exactly.
But even then, they still knew the causes of a lot of the stuff.
Right. She tried to actually make up with him, but it didn't. But to no avail. It didn't work. And on the night he killed himself, she was in the house, and it was reported that he was impotent or a latent homosexual, and he shot himself. And when she heard the news, she was in the upstairs bedroom, and he tried to kill himself by taking an overdose of sleeping pills, but it was not successful. So she built another house, and she died there a few years later of kidney disease. She didn't get any medical help because her parents were Christian Scientists, and they didn't believe in modern medicine.
How horrible is that?
I know, I think so too. So she didn't get any help for her medical problems, which I feel is really sad. Gosh, somebody somebody you love is suffering from medical problems.
So that's interesting. So what that's saying is Jean Harlow A didn't die in that house. She died in another house.
Right.
She was beaten in that house. That doesn't mean she wasn't left beaten and needed help.
Yeah.
And he left her that way and someone else found her. Maybe it could be residual. I'm just saying, this is based on this information right here. I would wonder if it's not residual.
Right.
That's please help me. It could be, and I could see it opening up maybe to a female energy as opposed to a male energy, wanting help after that occurred.
I mentioned here that that when she heard the news, she was in the upstairs bedroom and she tried to kill herself. I said himself, herself, by taking an overdose of sleeping pills.
So she took the pills. So he already shot himself.
Yeah, he already shot himself.
She felt devastated.
She took the pills and she wasn't successful, which would make sense to hear, please help me, because she was probably.
Well, the time between he shot himself and her taking the pills, trying to kill herself, she probably wanted help.
Decided
that was the only way she was going to get peace, was to take the sleeping pills.
Right. So even though she lived a few more years and she built another house and she lived a few more years, I can see if that memory was strong within her. I can see if her spirit's still hanging around, her still wanting to help. Especially if she died of a disease that was never looked at and she was suffering from it, because I imagine that was painful.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think of Houdini and his spleen when he got punched. He punched me, and he had a stomach ache, and then he died because of the punch. It's kind of reminds me of that a little bit.
Yeah. So sadly, it's sad that bad memories can stay within you even after you feel you've overcame them, or they can stay in the subconscious, bad memories. And I do feel that if you die and your spirit's around, the bad memories can stay within you. I mean, probably very strong. So it wouldn't surprise me to hear that she was hanging around the house and she wanted the help, especially if she never really got it. They didn't have help for stuff like that really back then.
And now you have other information about other...
Yeah, there's actually a San Francisco connection.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah,
that's great.
Dorothy Millette was actually the first wife of Paul Bern, who was Jean Harlow's husband. And she checked out of the Plaza Hotel in San Francisco shortly after she heard on the radio that Jean Harlow's husband was dead. I think the Plaza Hotel, it's still around, isn't it?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. Apparently she paid up her account. She'd been living at the hotel for 4 months, and she booked a $3 stateroom on the Delta King riverboat. And the riverboat officials confirmed that she boarded later that day, which was September 6, 1932. And she was seen a few times. A waiter remembered her at dinner. He said she was good looking, a pretty woman, but she was an exhausted, tired woman who barely ate her dinner. And at 2:30 a.m., a man from Walnut Creek, he went up to for what they call a constitutional on the top deck.
Get a drink?
Yeah, and he, right, exactly. And he saw Millette crying and looking at the water. She was probably just looking down at the water crying, and she didn't seem to notice him. So she was probably in her own world there.
Yeah.
So 2 hours later, a night watchman making the rounds, he found a woman's coat and shoes on the deck. And when the river boat docked in the morning, she didn't come out. She didn't disembark with it. So the Delta King staff began searching for her. In Beverly Hills, the police at the home of Jean Harlow were wondering where they could find her. And her husband, MGM studio exec Paul Bern, he was dead in the bathroom. There was a bullet found in his head. And the police determined that there was something strange about his personal history. It seemed that Jean Harlow wasn't his only wife.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So they began to get the whole picture. Dorothy Millette was the first wife of MGM producer Paul Bern, who later married Jean Harlow. So apparently he was still married to Dorothy.
Uh-oh.
Apparently, a lot of people didn't understand why Jean Harlow was with Paul Bern. They didn't understand what she saw in him. And when she was only 22, she was one of the biggest film stars in the world. And, she was a very good-looking woman. She rose to fame in the 1930 Howard Hughes classic, Hell's Angels. And around that time, that's when she met Paul Bern, who was a 40-year-old German film executive with MGM. He was a very serious man. He wasn't your typical handsome Hollywood type. He was plain, apparently, but he had a lot of connections. And he convinced MGM to sign her. And more importantly, he believed that she could be a serious actor, not just a sex symbol. They had a brief courtship, and then they married in July 1932. And 2 months later, he was dead of a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head, which is a very sad, short time. And when his body was discovered by the household staff, the first call was not to the police, it was actually to MGM. And the studio sent over its top fixers, who combed through the scene for 2 hours before the police were summoned, which I think was really weird.
That was common in LA at that during
that was common
period.
At that time,
Yep.
really? Okay. They also informed Harlow that her husband was dead, and she spent the night of his suicide at her mother's house. So when MGM went to work to spin the story with the press to protect her, the police were seeking a paper trail. They found it through George G. Clarkin, his Los Angeles insurance advisor. And Clarkin admitted that Bern had never divorced Millette. In fact, he'd set up a trust fund for Millette. A lawyer in New York confirmed that Paul Bern's confirmed a secret marriage to her. He said that he'd drawn up a will for Millette over a decade ago. And, I'm surprised myself the marriage was legal and that they went ahead, and that nobody looked into this before she was married to him.
Unless someone volunteers the information, and it was his first marriage was a secret marriage, you wouldn't think, he doesn't talk about being married, so
Right.
everyone assumes he's not.
Right.
He's not going to say anything.
He's not going to say anything.
So he's going to
Yeah.
set it up like it's the first time he got married. And then you find out later that that's not the case.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, these days, I think these days it's different. They, that stuff is found out more, but those days maybe not so much. I don't know. He claims that he was always under the impression that Dorothy was his wife. He said, I believe there was some legal marriage ceremony performed, he told the press, and I heard somewhere that Mrs. Bern died in a sanitarium. And because Paul Bern had never mentioned her, he didn't talk about her for years. So the reporters, they found Paul Bern's sister, who filled in the rest of the story. Bern had met Dorothy Millette in Toronto, where they were both working as actors in a theater company. They married and moved to New York City so that Bern could pursue a career in stage management. And then something went wrong. His health took a turn, and according to the newspaper accounts, she moved to a sanitarium. Rather by mutual decision or not, he left for California, but she didn't come with him.
It's interesting.
And you know what I also found interesting is it was his sister who talked about this. Jean Harlow never met his sister because the sister would have been surprised. I'm surprised his sister never said anything.
Well, again, more things he doesn't talk about. His sibling, his past marriage.
Right, exactly.
Or current marriage, I should say. Really.
But you would think that, introduce my family, my wife, but, well.
Think about it.
Yeah,
My parents are in Germany. This is my first marriage, and you don't mention your siblings. You can just say, I don't have any siblings.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
it. You wouldn't ask again.
Or your second marriage, rather, second private, secret marriage.
But you wouldn't talk about your
You wouldn't
secret
talk about it,
marriage.
yeah. Well, while he was building up his career at MGM, he continued to support his wife in New York. So when her health recovered, she moved into the
Algonquin.
and he sent her a monthly stipend of $350, which is over $5,000 in today's money. And they wrote each other all the time. There were letters found in her handbag at the Plaza Hotel that was on the MGM stationery. So they found all the letters that they wrote to each other. And one of the letters was written a few months before he married to Jean Harlow. And in it, he responded to her plan to vacation in San Francisco. And he recommended the Plaza and the Cliff hotels, which were not the most expensive, but they were fashionable for the time. And he said that he would fund her trip, so he paid for it. So he said, if you do go, I hope that it'll be a happy change. And he signed it, my love and best wishes always. It was a weird marriage. They were still communicating, but she wasn't with him.
Yeah.
Anyway, on September 14th, there were two fishermen near Walnut Grove. They found a body floating in the Sacramento River. And in the week since she disappeared from the Delta King, the press took to calling her the ghost wife. And many people speculated that she faked her death. And rumors were starting that a mystery woman was seen with Bern the day before his suicide. And perhaps Dorothea, who who was the Spurn woman, she had murdered him and gone on the run. That's what the rumor was. The truth is that they never really resolved the case, and nobody will ever know for sure, which is very sad. At the coroner's inquest, his friends testified that he long talked about suicide because he was depressed, and he was depressed most of his adult life. And the publicity since marrying Jean seemed to have taken a toll on him as well, apparently. MGM fixers hinted that Bern may have been biologically unfitted for marriage, which was a rumor that cast away blame from Harlow and painted him as a weak and unworthy of her. Like you said, the studio tried to make up stories to
spin it
around.
Yeah.
Right. Also at the inquest, his personal doctor, Howard P. Jones, claims that he knew exactly what was at the root of his friend's suicide. Out of respect for him, he wouldn't disclose it publicly, but he assured that it had nothing to do with his first wife, Dorothy Millette, or any other woman. So he probably knew that he was depressed or that there was something wrong. So as for Dorothea, she didn't fake her own death. She jumped from the Delta King that night, and it was her body was found a week later, which is sad. She knew that Bern had changed his will to make Harlow the beneficiary, making her instantly penniless. She freaked out when she found out.
Yeah.
And she lost her husband and her financial support, and she must have felt sad and desperate about everything.
I'm sure at that point.
What a sad story.
Yeah.
So anyway, lots of rumors resurfaced that she murdered him. Of course, there's never been any proof, and the timeline, of course, seems to rule it out now that we know that she killed herself. She jumped from the Delta. She would have had to go to Beverly Hills and kill him, early hours of the morning. They returned to San Francisco. We all know that doesn't fit with the story.
No, there's no way she could have done that.
Right. So Jean Harlow did not remarry. This marriage was actually her third. It ended up in divorce 12 months later, which is very sad. I mean, gosh, she was still young, So she was only 26 in 1937, and her health was starting to fail, and she fainted on the set of Saratoga, the movie of Saratoga. It was thought that she had the flu, but she presented other symptoms, which was bloating, vision loss. Her skin pallor looked gray. Yeah, it sounds terrible. And a doctor was brought in for a second opinion, realizing that she was dying of kidney failure. Less than a week after she was diagnosed, she slipped into a coma and she died. Sadly. The studio closed the day of her funeral.
She was not interred next to her dead husband, Paul Bern, in Inglewood. Instead, she was buried in a private vault paid for by then-boyfriend William Powell at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale. The marble mausoleum cost him $25,000 and had an additional space meant to house Powell one day. When Powell died in 1984, he was buried instead next to his third wife. Far from loved ones lies Dorothy Millette at East Lawn Memorial Park in Walnut Grove. Her gravestone, etched with flowers, reads, Dorothy Millette Bern. Now, Paul Bern's death was curious enough, and less than 2 months after marrying blonde bombshell Jean Harlow in 1932, he was found dead of a headshot wound, and what they determined, obviously, is an alibi, controversial to be suicide. And then Dorothy had jumped years later. 36 years later, actress Sharon Tate was looking for a place to stay and asked then-boyfriend Jay Sebring, could they stay at his place, the home at 9860 Easton Drive in Benedict Canyon, where Bern had shot himself, which Sebring was well known to have purchased in large part due to its grim history. It's likely the story of Bern's suicide had been a topic of conversation between the two of them. And according to journalist Dick Kleiner, in an interview with him, Tate recalled a vision she had on a night when Sebring was out of town. She was already creeped out by every little sound in the house. When she was getting ready to sleep, a crazy little man appeared in her bedroom that she recognized as Paul Bern.
Oh, wow.
Now, she pulled on a bathrobe. That would freak me out.
That would freak me out, too.
And she ran out of the room. She ran down the stairwell, and at the bottom saw a blonde woman tied to a banister. Her throat was slit, and there was blood everywhere.
It's crazy.
Tate passed this off as a bad nightmare, unable to ascribe it to anything else. 3 years later, and a mile and a half later, Tate was found slaughtered with four others at 10050 Celio Drive, victims, of course, of the Manson family massacre.
That is freaky. The whole thing is sad and freaky.
But what's weird is that she didn't just see Bern. She saw a blonde woman tied to the banister with her throat slit.
Yeah, I wonder what that was about. But it wasn't necessarily Jean.
Sure, her throat wasn't slit.
Her throat wasn't slit.
But don't think this is the same house that we started out talking about.
No.
I think this is this the house that she died in?
I don't think so.
I'm kind of unclear whether it's the same house.
I don't think it is. But apparently it had something to do... Well, wait a minute. But it had something to do with his suicide, though.
Yeah.
So I think it wasn't the same house Jean died in, but it was the house he died in.
The only reason Sharon Tate's friend bought it is because of the guy committing suicide in the house.
Right.
So that wasn't the house that Jean died in.
No, it wasn't the house she died in.
But you gotta wonder if this guy was, secret
Shady.
marriage. Well, secret marriage.
Yeah.
Has a sister who he didn't mention, and his wife's he's manic depressive. Who's to say he didn't kill other girls?
Or something didn't happen with another woman, yeah.
That's what I'm saying. He had her tied up, he slit her throat, he got rid of her. And that vision that Sharon Tate had, awoken from the dream, seeing him, and going downstairs and seeing that vision of that woman was probably screaming, pleading, please help me, please help me, tied to the banister with her throat slit.
Right. You never know what kind of history the man had, especially since he had one secret marriage he was still married to.
Yeah.
Who knows what his history with women were, especially since he beat poor Jean Harlow. He was known as a beater. Who knows what he did to other women he was out with?
Yeah. But I'm wondering, Sharon Tate, was she clairvoyant or?
I wonder about that too. She must have been sensitive, and she didn't even know it.
Yeah. She could have literally had a vision of what happened there. Mm-hmm. Picked up on the fact that he was there. Obviously, that woman was in jeopardy. Tied her there. Maybe she was going to rat on him,
right?
Or extorted him, and he thought, "I'll get even with you," and tied her up and slit her throat. Because it sounds like he doesn't care if he's married to one, married to another. He has latent homosexual tendencies. He's suicidal, manic depressive. He's about every category of bad that he had going on. And I wouldn't be surprised if he had other starlets on the side.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't be surprised too.
Kept on the side, make promises too. Because look at I'll pay, like Dorothy, I'll pay for your San Francisco trip.
Because even the most mentally ill people could still hold steady jobs and act like everyday normal people. But then you find out they have a weird history. Yeah,
but I find it fascinating that Sharon Tate had that vision.
That vision.
And I've never heard of that before.
I've never heard of that either.
So to me that's actually kind of fascinating.
And these days with the way they can do background checks and look at somebody's history, mm-hmm. and the way, who knows what they would find out if they actually looked into this man's history now, what they would find out about him. So it's a crazy, interesting story altogether, and it's really sad because Jean Harlow did not deserve any of this.
Well, no one deserves
any of that. No, she was young. She still lived with her parents. She was just trying to have a career, and she was trying to. Obviously, she didn't deserve it, and she didn't really look too closely to the history of the men she married, or that particular man.
What's interesting, when I went on the web to look for the house, because the house is still there.
Yes.
Only a part of it is the way it originally was.
Yes.
It's almost, I think it's the guest house part of the house that's still intact.
Oh, wow.
The rest has been revamped and remodeled. But you got to wonder if those people have any experiences or
they probably
sightings.
Do. I wouldn't be surprised, but they're not. But they probably don't want to talk about it very much because, well, you want to keep part of your life private. Because otherwise people will be trying to
looky-loos in your backyard,
or they want to print an article about it, and they probably just want to take pictures.
Yep.
You know how it is, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I hope they don't. I hope that those souls are at rest and not going near their old haunts.
Look at what happened to Benedict Canyon. Then the Manson
what happened
massacres.
to Sharon later?
There's nothing but bad news in Benedict Canyon.
I know. I remember years ago, as a teenager, back in the 70s, we drove past the house, and we actually walked and we looked, and it was still open for you to walk through, to walk close enough where you could see it. And we just got the creeps. We saw it. We got the creeps. And we said, let's go. Let's get out of here. We went in the car and we drove off. This was back in 77.
I know they demolished it not long after that, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
There actually was people selling bricks from the fireplace
Oh, that's
of the
crazy.
house on like eBay and online.
Yeah, that's nuts.
People were buying them. I mean, you could say bricks from anywhere, couldn't you? How do you prove?
How
that
would
it's
you
from the
know?
house?
I know, but
Dirt and dust from the property. People were selling all kinds of crazy stuff from that property.
we got the creeps when we went close to the house.
That was brutal murder.
We didn't even want it. We didn't even want to stay there. We didn't even want to stay there for a few minutes. We just said, "This is creepy. Let's get out." You could feel it the minute you drive through.
And there's another house next door to the Tate house.
Yeah.
That the guy is having a lot of experiences. He was on Ghost Adventures.
Oh, really?
Jackie's actually been investigating at the house too. And
Really?
Yeah, I was going to go with her, but I couldn't. But yeah, I guess and he's had a lot of people in there to investigate. You can actually.
So he's
arrange
open to
with
it, and
him.
it doesn't
Yeah.
bother him. Okay.
Not at all. He acknowledges that stuff's happening in his house, and it's really close, right next door to the property.
He probably wants it to be investigated because he probably wants to get to the bottom of the whole story.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sure anything he can gather, absolutely, to back that up. So, obviously, Benedict Canyon has a lot of ghosts
really
and a lot of
does.
tragic history.
It really does.
See, Hollywood isn't always glamour. I mean,
Oh, no.
Usually, there's truth is often stranger than fiction, folks.
Often stranger, yeah.
And I think this whole story is a good example of that.
Very good example.
So
wow. Yeah. Wow.
So if you're looking for a house in Benedict Canyon, you might want to ask what's happened.
You want to ask the history first.
But you do have to divulge in California. If someone died in your house, you have to divulge who it was and what circumstances were.
Yeah, old Hollywood is worth visiting. The old hotels, the old buildings.
The ones that are left.
The ones that are left. We visited the Roosevelt a few weeks ago.
That's
and
a pretty cool hotel.
It was very cool looking, and you could feel it in there when you walk in. Folks, you get a chance to visit Hollywood and go to some famous places where apparently there was a lot of history. I say go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that was the ghost of JEAN HARLOW.
Yeah.
So I guess until next time.
Until next
we'll
time.
say goodbye.
Good night.
Bye.
See you next week.
Royalty-free, copyright-free music by Kevin MacLeod and Ross Bugden.